Welcome back to another episode of Fitz and Hap. I'm Luke.
And I'm Emma.
And this week we're discussing Chapter 4, The Hedge-Witch of Fool's Errand. And we're going to have a lot of highway noise in the background. So
Maybe you'll be able to edit it all
maybe
out.
I'll be able to calm it down a bit. Just in case, it's to warn you ahead of time. There might be some white noise in this one. But we're back. We took a little bit of a break. We pre-recorded some episodes, so it feels good to kind of jump back into the book here.
Yeah.
And
get back to talking about our boy Fitz.
Yeah. And as the title says, the Hedge-Witch, we are going to be meeting Jinna as well.
Yeah.
This chapter.
And before we get into the chapter, there's a little excerpt from Selkin's Travels in the Six Duchies that talks about the legend of a hedge witch named Sylvia Copperleaf, who gave Baldric Farseer a marvelous sieve that purified all waters that passed through it. And Silva keeps or has such strong magic that everything stays generation after generation.
Yep.
It'd be interesting to know if the sieve is still in play with the Farseers. I don't know if we ever hear about it. Maybe this...
I think it's like a folklore kind of thing more so than anything.
But apparently she also gave a charm to the town of Eccles.
Yeah, either Eccles or Ecclesea.
Who to ward against pestilence. And that worked for many years until one year the new town council decided to build a new wall for more commerce, and then the blood plague hit.
Yeah.
For the second wave and
through
killed a
that
bunch of
gate
people.
that was not protected.
Yeah. So hedge witches are a long-standing tradition in the Six Duchies. This is not a new magic. It's not necessarily feared either.
No, it's not.
So, which is something Fitz discusses later, so we can talk about that when he gets to it. But it's really interesting to think about all the different types of magic in this world.
Yeah. All right, well, we jump back in with Fitz and Hap. They are in the middle of summer right now, and Fitz says it kind of finds them just as it finds them always, so they're doing basically the same kind of chores that they've always been doing, curing fish and preparing stuff for the winters.
Cutting down logs.
Exactly, doing all the chores.
Taking care of the garden, the chickens.
And Fitz says that Starling's departure had effectively quenched the restlessness that Chade's visit had sparked. And he's telling himself that.
Right.
You know, he does this often, and we've discussed it before, where he lies to himself just to convince himself that, like, no, I'm not actually feeling this way. It's just because of this, you know?
Yeah. And
so it happens, frequently throughout this chapter as well.
Yeah. And then we also have Fitz deciding to continue to talk to Hap about an apprenticeship, maybe.
Yeah.
Even though he doesn't want to leave, he does still recognize that Hap is getting to be of an age to need to leave.
And Hap is very, very enthusiastic, and even has a recommendation for a cabinet maker in Big Buckkeep Town. So there's a goal there, and Fitz, is very concerned about the money that he would have to spend to apprentice Hap with this Gindast. And so Hap also says there's another option. I've heard of a boat maker in a different town that is also pretty good.
Right. Well, he also is sort of upset at the prospect of needing to go to Buckkeep Town at all. And
right.
So when he balks at the suggestion, Hap takes it as, oh, we don't have enough money.
Yeah.
And Fitz realizes, oh, we actually might not have enough money. So maybe it's better he thinks it's that reason. And
Fitz uneasily wonders if the boy was not tailoring his dreams to the depths of Fitz's pockets.
Which he is. And I think it's really interesting to me that Fitz continuously has this narrative of like, well, hopefully he's not doing this. And then getting evidence after evidence that he is doing that, because of course he is. He's a kid and he's perceptive and knows what's going on and knows it's expensive to be an apprentice. And Fitz is just kind of oblivious to Hap's whole, I don't know, life? Not life, that's harsh, but it feels like in this chapter, there's a lot happening to Hap that we don't get to be privy to because Fitz isn't paying attention. Like, he's like, well, Hap gave a different suggestion, so he's probably fine. Hopefully it's not because he thinks I can't afford, but whatever. Anyway, I'm really struggling with Starling. So I like there's a lot of introspection, and obviously that comes from being inside his head, right? This
Right.
isn't we don't get to see every little detail of what's happening, so of course we're missing out on what's happening with Hap, but as the chapter goes on, it's really clear how unreliable of a narrator Fitz is to me, because continuously Fitz does things that indicate that Hap is going through some of his own stuff that is being completely missed by Fitz.
Or at least not talked about in these books, yeah. So the boy, obviously Hap, Fitz refers to him as the boy. The boy has interest in an apprenticeship, and it remains a topic for late night talks only, basically, because there is interest there. There's like, yeah, I want to send you on an apprenticeship soon. But that's all that there is. There's just talks at the moment. However, Fitz does offer a few ways to make some money, save up some money. He does go along with Hap to the markets as well. So there's a few options there. And eventually, Fitz wants to send him to an apprenticeship. He just, at this point, is like, I need to save money. We need to make some money, set it aside so we can send Hap to a good apprenticeship, because Fitz also talks about how the Six Duchies, a lot of skills and knowledge is passed down from a master to apprentice kind of working in a kind of deal. And often the very skilled ones require some fee up front.
Right, because they don't want to just give their knowledge away to just anybody is the thought. And it seems pretty culturally normal. It's not something that Fitz is angry about, other than the fact that Hap might miss out on an opportunity for lack of his foresight.
Right.
But like ultimately it's one of those things that seems to be pretty accepted, that if you're not going to teach your child your own sort of
your own trade,
yeah, then you have to pay. And that's just how it is.
The wolf did not ask me about the journey I had earlier proposed. I think that in his heart he was relieved to see it postponed. There were days when I felt that Starling's words had made an old man of me. Years had done that in truth to the wolf. I suspected he was very old for his kind, though I had no idea how long a wild wolf usually lived. I wondered sometimes if our bond did not lend him an unnatural vitality. Once it even crossed my mind that perhaps he used up my years to lengthen his own. Yet that thought came not with any resentment that he might borrow my days, but with hope that we might still have a good long span together. For once the boy was apprenticed out, whom else did I have in the world besides Night Eyes? I wanted to point that out because we keep getting passages in these chapters about Night Eyes' age, and since it's such a big plot point in this book, I kept wanting to bring it up and remind all of us of the sadness to come.
Yeah, thanks for that reminder.
Yeah, you're welcome.
No, I think it is really good to point out that, Night Eyes is aging. He's getting older, and it's even apparent to Fitz, which means he must be getting pretty old. But there is sort of that undertaking of worry as a wit companion from Fitz, that soon his friend will be gone, and then what? Because Hap's also going to be gone soon, so then it's just Fitz, and it's sort of like a sad realization for Fitz, I think. Obviously sad because Night Eyes is going to be gone, but also added to the fact that he doesn't really have anybody once Night Eyes is gone.
Right. So for a while, Fitz is wondering if Chade's going to come visit again, but their cottage remains empty, and eventually, as I mentioned before, he accompanies Hap to the market. They want to make some money.
And Night Eyes stays back because he hates the dust and the noise and the confusion of the markets, which secretly Fitz also hates.
Yeah,
but
right.
He knows that he needs to go out and do this for Hap's sake.
And he was also pleasantly surprised how many recalled Tom Badgerlock and commented that it was good to see him come to the market again. So he was remembered. He's not just a loner who no one likes. Fitz is reminded that...
Yeah. People like him.
People like him.
He's personable and friendly.
It was the second time we went to the market that we chanced to meet Hap's Hedge-Witch from Buckkeep. We had set our wares out on the tail of our pony cart in the market. Midway through the morning, she found us there, exclaiming with pleasure at seeing Hap again. I stood quietly to one side, watching them talk. He had told me Jinna was pretty close. Oh, he had told me Jinna was pretty, and so she was, but I confess that I was startled to find her closer to my age than his. I had supposed her a girl who had turned his head when they met in Buckkeep. Instead, she was a woman nearing middle years, with hazel eyes, a scattering of freckles, and curly hair that shaded from auburn to brown. She had the round and pleasant figure of a mature woman. When he told her that her charm against pickpockets had been stolen from him before the day was out, she laughed aloud, an open, hearty laugh. Then she calmly replied to him that that was exactly how the charm was intended to work. His purse had been protected when the thief took the charm instead of it. Then Hap glances around to include him in the conversation, and Jinna looks very wary at first until Hap introduces him as, this is, Tom, my guardian. And then she's like, oh, hi, how's it going? And steps up close to Fitz, and Fitz realizes that she is hard of seeing as well.
Right. And I do want to say, I feel like poor Jinna, it would be a little off-putting to be talking to this kid that you met at Buckkeep, and there's just this like older man lurking, watching you talk and not saying anything, which in Fitz's mind, he's just being polite, right? He's making sure Hap is okay and sort of just observing. He is not trying to be weird. But from Jinna's point of view, it is just like this grown man sort of in the corner of the conversation staring at you. So
right, yeah.
It's, fun. But Jinna seems to warm up to Fitz pretty quickly. There's still a little bit of wariness. Obviously, it's a stranger. She doesn't know him.
Right.
And I'm sure as a Hedge-Witch, she has to be a little bit wary of people in general.
Why do you think that?
Well, I think being a peddler of like a magic thing, I'm sure there are plenty of people who don't believe in it and are mean about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
like even
fair.
if it's accepted and it's not as bad as being witted to be a Hedge-Witch, I feel like there's probably still a little bit of
some prejudice.
Yeah.
Maybe.
And so I guess maybe that's just my read on it. And so I just assume, of course, you're going to be wary. But also, Tom Badgerlock is this like big, beefy dude who looks growly. So he does have a mean resting face, we've been told. So,
yeah.
And he's got scars on his face and a broken nose.
Some pretty wicked scars, too.
Yeah. I'd be scared.
So there, Hap and Jinna are chatting away while they're setting out their goods and sitting at the market. And Fitz is listening in, and he listened in as Hap told her of his apprenticeship options. When he spoke to Jinna, it became very clear to me just how much he had wished for the cabinet maker in Buckkeep rather than the boat builder in Hammerby Cove. I found myself pondering if there was yet some way it might be arranged. Not only the higher fee, but for someone other than myself to negotiate the apprenticeship on his behalf. Could Chade be persuaded to help me in such an endeavor? And then his mind wanders to like, okay, then what would that cost me? Like, what would he ask in return?
Yeah.
And then he was deep in his thoughts when he feels an elbow in his ribs, and Hap is kind of staring at him like, Tom? And Fitz instantly perceives that in some way I had embarrassed him. Jinna was looking at both of us expectantly. Yes? See, I told you it would be fine with him, Hap crowed. Well, I do thank you as long as you are sure it would be no trouble, Jinna replied. It's a long road with inns both far-spaced and expensive to one such as myself. I nodded my agreement to the statement, and in the next few minutes of conversation, I realized that Hap had extended the hospitality of our cottage to her the next time that she happened to pass our way. I privately sighed, because Hap loves the guests, but Fitz would rather just kind of be alone.
Right.
He says in his mind.
Yes, in his mind, he privately sighs and is annoyed because he feels like new people into the home is danger, which is kind of sad, right? Because, there's a real reason to feel that way, but also I kind of think he should, for the most part, feel safe even with strangers.
Right.
Nobody's coming to the middle of nowhere and seeing him and being like, that's Fitz chivalry. You know what I mean? And I think that's his big fear, is that people will recognize him. I don't know.
Either that or him being witted. You
Or
know,
yeah.
the recent talks from Starling might have stirred that up a little bit too.
Well, yeah, but I figure that he's always felt that there's a bit of danger of people coming. I don't think it's
Yeah.
like a new thing.
Yeah, that's fair.
And then as the day goes on, which Jinna has set up in the shade of their cart, of Fitz and Hap's cart. So she's there the whole day. And he finds himself studying her the way Chade had taught him to make sure she isn't a threat now that he knows that she might come to his house. And he's sort of watching her and realizes that she is what she says she is.
Yep. Yeah, there's nothing to suggest that she's anything other than a Hedge-Witch.
Yeah. And he seems to approve of her because he notes that, you know, she has herbs for sale, but they're all listed correctly and with the correct reasoning or like medicine purposes listed. So there's nothing being sold as something it's not. And he also sees that she has other little trinkets, and he's really curious about hedge witches in general. Fitz doesn't seem to believe that hedge witches do anything. Like, he's not convinced that that's a real magic. But they're also really secretive in how they do what they do. And so there's no way for him to know, and he's never really gotten to be close enough to tell. But he does talk a little bit about how Chade has taught him certain hedge magics, I guess.
Or at least about it.
Yeah.
So we learn about hedge magic here as well, that it's accepted and not really held in awe by the common folk of the Six Duchies. It's just kind of commonplace at fairs, markets, festivals. But people who claim that they are hedge witches or hedge wizards can be complete charlatans and basically street magicians.
Yeah.
You know, disappearing things, card tricks, love potions that are nonsense, those sorts of things, the like kind of bombastic street criers that want to attract attention and get people in to scam them out of their money. Yeah. So he's very wary, and that's why he's kind of also studying Jinna here.
Exactly. And he does mention that these charlatans are mostly harmless because really they're just selling a product. Whether or not it works is not that big of a deal.
Or telling fortunes for people that are, you know, they're always good fortunes.
Yeah. So he found that really interesting to be near Jinna, who doesn't seem to be doing that. It seems like she's a more legitimate one. But
he doesn't know if anything works.
Yeah, he's not really sure that it's anything more than just really well-crafted knowledge of herbs. Because there's also, he mentions that some of her herb pouches, she says there's crystals in there that will help the potency. And he says, I suspect sugar or salt.
Yeah.
And he doesn't think it's
fair. I mean, if you put sugar or salt with an herb, it's going to taste better.
Yeah. But no, so I think it's really interesting to like have Fitz there sort of being critical of a magic. I don't know. I think something about that's really funny to me, considering magic is absolutely real in this world. And he 100% knows that. And he's sort of like, yeah, but this isn't real magic.
I mean, to be fair, if there's a lot of people claiming that, oh, I'm this person and they're just the street magician kind of people, you might be skeptical as well.
I mean, sure. I don't know. I just thought it was really interesting to have this character who also has a magic, a different one than we get to see. And have Fitz be like, no, I don't think so.
So what we know about hedge magic in general as rereaders here is that their charms are the ones that actually have some sort of potency if they're a real hedge witch or hedge wizard. They create these charms, and according to Fitz, they lay them out in different colored fabric sacks, denoting, you know, what their uses are. And there's some colors out there that he knows and some that he doesn't recognize. But then she also has some other like polished stones and things like that aren't that are cheaper and aren't necessarily supposed to be as potent because they're not personalized and they're not the main magic that the hedge witch or wizard does.
Right. It's more just general good wishes.
Yes. So with all of that in mind, with the common folk of the Six Duchies not holding hedge magic in awe like the skill or in abhorrence like the wit, people approach her, and she does a pretty good trade and sells a couple charms and some things, and including a charm to a man who's looking for good fortune in his house and with himself and finding a wife. And this is really funny because Fitz describes him as a broad man, muscled as a plowman, and homely as a sod roof. He looked about my age, and I silently wished him well in his quest. This is an ugly, broad, built man. And Fitz is like, I wish him luck.
Yeah, good luck, man. I get it. Get you your charm, you know?
Yep.
Yeah. He also mentions that if there's any magic in these little charm bags that Jinna is selling, his wit and skill do not pick up on any of it.
Right.
Like nothing's emanating from them that he personally can feel from his magics, which probably also lends itself to him feeling like then it isn't magic.
Yeah, because remember, he like uses his wit to detect everything around him.
Yes.
So if it's just kind of like an inert object, he's probably like, meh. I've seen more magical things like the stone dragons.
Yeah, the stone road.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, I don't know. So it's really interesting to me that it's not a detectable thing, because I think that's an interesting detail.
Yeah.
But as the day goes on, the neighbor from across, Fitz's neighbor from across the way, comes to market with his pigs.
Yes, Baylor.
Yes.
Fitz says he sees him, and that's fine with him because he doesn't really like the man.
Yeah,
they are the closest neighbor, so.
Yeah, it's more so he doesn't like the man because of his casual cruelty towards his animals.
Yes.
And he talks about how times like this make the wit more of a curse than anything, because while he can shield himself generally from animals and their thoughts and feelings, whenever he's in close proximity, it's harder. And Baylor pulls up right next to Fitz, and even though there's not a ton of room, he shoves his own cart in there and sort of has his ox, which is in pain because it has an ill-fitting harness, and some piglets in the back, which are scorching under the sun and thirsty and scared. And so even though Fitz has sort of a barrier up, he still can feel that emanating with them so close.
Which is why he greets Baylor and says, like, better get some water to them to make them lively for market.
Yeah. So he's pretty good about disguising the fact that it's because he can feel their need. It's more like a friendly tip to help sell the pigs. But he does find himself being more vocal and outspoken about their mistreatment because of their feelings grating on him.
Right. So Baylor comes over, inspects their goods, kind of makes a disparaging snort or noise, and then passive-aggressively confronts them, Fitz and Hap, saying, "These are good piglets, but there were 3 more in my litter. One was bigger than these." He paused, waiting. Uncertain of what he expected, I replied, "Sounds like a nice big litter." Aye, it was, until the 3 disappeared. A shame. Lost while ranging with the sow, were they? He nodded. One day there were 10. The next day, 7. A shame. I shook my head. He took a step closer to me. You and the boy. You wouldn't happen to see them? I know sometimes my sow ranges almost to your stream. I haven't. I turned to Hap. The boy had an apprehensive look on his face. I noticed that Jinna and her customer had fallen silent, their interest caught by Baylor's intent tone. I hated to be the center of such attention. I felt the blood begin to rise in me, but I pleasantly asked my boy, "Hap, have you seen any sign of 3 of Baylor's piglets?" "Not so much as a track or a pile of dung," he replied gravely. He held himself very still when he spoke, as if a sudden movement could precipitate danger. I turned back to Baylor. "Sorry," I said.
I just want to pause before we keep going on. I think it's really important to point out Fitz doesn't seem to grasp how serious the situation is potentially. And like, he seems confused for the first several minutes of this conversation of like, what's he getting at? What's going on? And he only starts feeling a little bit wary whenever he turns around and notices other people are paying attention. And it doesn't seem like he's wary of what Baylor's saying or implying. He's wary of the attention he's getting.
Right.
And I think that's a really important detail because Fitz is so out of practice with people that he doesn't understand Baylor's tone here. He can't grasp that Baylor is being accusatory, that this is bad, and Hap has already grasped it. So it's not like it's not, he's like, Baylor's some master social guy who's really good at hiding his intent until later. It just takes a really long time for Fitz to grasp that, like, Baylor's accusing him of something.
Yeah, he's really become a hermit for sure.
And so I thought that was a really interesting detail that is really easy to sort of pass over. But if you, like, as you go on, you notice that more so, first and foremost, he's embarrassed by the intention or attention of people around him, and then starts to realize that Baylor's not dropping it. Baylor's accusing them of something. And it takes him like 3 times of Baylor being like, so where are they? For him to be like, wait a minute, this guy might be accusing me. And it's, I don't know, like, I feel really bad for Fitz, but also, come on, guy, like, you were trained in social concepts. You know what I mean? Like, he was trained in how to.
It was 15 years ago, and he hasn't seen another human since besides Hap and Starling. And the occasional tinker.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that's a really interesting detail, because we also get Fitz being like, oh, I'm a little rusty, and I can't understand why Chade is so angry that I'm rusty later. And I think this is a really good example of he's really out of practice.
Yeah.
And
just like not even doing anything that he was trained for, but just socially.
Yeah. This is not even life or death. Well, I mean, maybe, but like, this isn't even that serious, and he can't read the situation for a while. So I just found that detail important to note. But yes, Baylor keeps going. He does not let it drop, even after Hap has said he hasn't seen anything.
I know you and your boy and that dog of yours range all about these hills. I would have thought you'd have seen something. And if you saw them, you'd know them for mine. You know they weren't strays free for the taking.
His remark was oddly pointed, and his eyes never left my face.
I shrugged, trying to keep my calm, but now other folk were pausing in their business, watching and listening. Baylor's eyes suddenly ranged round the audience and then came back to me. So you're sure you haven't seen my pigs? Not found one stuck or hurt somewhere? Not found it dead and used it for dog meat? It was my turn to glance about. Hap's face had gone red. Jinna looked distinctly uncomfortable. My anger surged that this man would dare to accuse me of theft, no matter how indirect his words were. I took a breath and managed to hold my temper. In a low, gratingly civil voice, I replied, I haven't seen your pigs, Baylor. You're sure? He took a step closer to me, mistaking my courtesy for passivity. Because it strikes me odd, 3 disappearing all at once. A wolf might take 1, or 1 the sow might misplace, but not 3. You haven't seen them? Fitz had been leaning on the cart. Now he stands to his full strength, full height. And despite his effort at control, Fitz could feel his chest and neck growing tight with anger. He responds in his mind, kind of prefacing the reader, I guess, of once he had been beaten really badly, and men react differently to that. Usually, in his opinion, one of 2 ways. One is to cower at anything, and the other one is to lash out at any sign of danger. The man who becomes most efficiently vicious first is most likely to be the man left standing. I had learned to be that man. I'm getting tired of that question, I warned him in a low growl. So now there's a little circle around them, and Fitz is on the verge of violence because Baylor just won't let up.
Yeah, this is really sad to me, because I think it goes back to sort of this theme that comes up in all of the Realm of the Elderlings series, is that trauma really stays with you. I mean, it's been 15 years since he was beat in the dungeon to near death by Regal. And even in this moment, this mundane moment where a man is just accusing him of stealing his pigs, he's thinking about, you have to be the aggressor. You cannot be weak. You cannot cower before people, or else you get hurt. Like, this is a knee-jerk reaction that has spanned 15 years. And it's not necessarily like as strong of a reaction as it probably would have been if Fitz was younger. But I think it's really interesting to have that still here of like, hey, I learned a long time ago, when people are being aggressive, you got to be more aggressive because I got beat. And I think, like, especially that preface of like, there are 2 ways to learn, or 2 lessons to learn. And I've learned this lesson. I don't know. It's really well done, I think, on Hobb's part.
So now with their audience there and Fitz up to his full height and barely contained rage, Baylor finally also senses that. And he takes a step back. Fitz can look around and see that Hap's face is white and he's scared. But Baylor really starts to cower then. He takes a step back and like, well, of course, if you haven't seen them, well then, I haven't seen them, Fitz spoke forcefully, cutting him off. The sounds of the market had retreated into a distant hum. I saw only Baylor. I stalked a step closer. Well, he backed another pace and dodged around his ox so the beast was between us. I didn't think you had, of course. You'd have chased them back my way for certain. But I wanted to let you know about it. Odd, isn't it, for 3 to go missing at once? Thought I'd let you know in case you'd had chickens disappearing. From conciliating, his voice went suddenly to conspiring. Like as not, we've had witted ones about in our hills, thieving my beasts as only they can. They wouldn't have had to chase them down. Just spell the sow and the piglets and walk right off with them. Everyone knows they can do that. Like as not. My temper flared. I managed to divert it into words. I spoke quietly, biting off each word. Like as not, the piglets fell down a creek bank and were swept away, or got separated from the sow. There's fox and cats and wolverine in those hills. If you want to be sure of your stock, keep a better watch on them. And then other people start, jumping in saying, oh, I had a calf go missing this spring. Cow straight off pregnant and came 2 days later empty, and no sign of the calf. And other people saying, yeah, it's probably the witted ones. There was the one by Hardened Spit that got away.
Yeah. Well, also with the calf story, when he went looking out for the calf, he did find
a burned out fire pit.
Yeah, of a burnt out fire pit. So now everybody has a common enemy and they're all getting excited to talk about all their animals that have gone missing and the witted freaks that are running around.
Yeah. And Baylor shoots Fitz a triumphant glance and then looks away from Fitz's face and be like, see, there it is. That's the excuse. I only wanted to warn you, neighbor to neighbor. Keep good watch on those chickens of yours. I'm doing a good thing.
Yes. I wasn't accusing you. I was just, making sure you knew.
Fitz doesn't even turn to look at anybody who's speaking anymore. The noise starts to pick back up in the market and he's just standing there amidst all the noise, isolated.
Especially with the noise of people jolly to be hating witted ones.
Yes. The surging of my heart was like a shaking inside me. The moment in which I might have killed him had passed like a fever breaking. I saw Hap wipe sweat from his brow, and Jinna put a hand on his shoulder and said something quietly to him. He shook his head, his lips white. Then he looked at me and gave me a shaky smile. It was over. And Fitz says, mind our wares, Hap. I'm going to go water the pony.
Right. And he talks about how even though his anger is gone, all around him, the talk of witted one continues. And it made him queasy. And I felt small and ashamed that I did not shout out at the injustice of it all. Instead, he goes and waters the horse. And it's just sort of the sad moment where Fitz is stuck, where people were already paying attention to him and he was already being accused of something, and he doesn't want to then turn around and be accused of being witted, even though he is.
Right.
But he can't really stick up for himself or other witted people because that puts him in danger. And it makes him feel ashamed that he's even worried about that when he knows the truth. And I think this is something he's really struggling with, of I have Hap here. I have Jinna that's next to our cart. I got to be safe for everybody. I can't just yell about, you guys are all dumb and don't know anything. And it's I think a really hard pill to swallow, to sort of take the hatred and pretend like it's not aimed at you.
So when he comes back, Baylor gives him a greeting and Fitz can only give him a nod. And thankfully somebody buys Baylor's piglets and he leaves eventually. And as soon as he leaves, Jinna observes, pleasant fellow. Hap laughed aloud and even I broke a sour smile. And then later they share their lunch together and have a little picnic there. And she made Fitz blush by saying, you look a vicious man when you scowl, Tom Badgerlock, and when you knot your fists I'd not want to know you. Yet when you smile or laugh aloud, your eyes put the lie to that look. Hap snickered to see me flush, and the rest of the day passed in good companionship and friendly barter. Not banter, although there's probably some banter in there too.
I'm sure.
Jinna had done well for herself as the day wound to a close, and her supply of charms had dwindled measurably. She says, soon I'll have to go back to Buckkeep Town and turn my hand to making more. It suits me better than selling, though I do like traveling about and meeting new folk. And Hap and Fitz look at their measly supply of coin and are like, well, we need to do a lot more because most of the folk here want to trade goods,
right?
Not money.
Fitz notes that that's the problem with a small market, is that there's not a lot of coin to be passed around. And so even though they did trade a lot of their goods, a lot of it was for things that they need at home and not a lot of coins. And so he can tell that he and Hap are both thinking, is there even going to be enough coins for Hap to go be an apprentice?
Yeah.
But it's not something that either of them really talk about out loud. It's just something that they're both worried about, clearly.
Yeah. So they sleep in their cart, and the next morning they bid farewell to Jinna. Jinna is reminded by Hap once again of the offer of hospitality, and Jinna looks at Tom, and Tom is like, yeah, you can come. Basically, he's forced to smile and nod, Fitz says.
Yes.
And they had a fine day for the journey at home. They talked of nothing, that the market was much larger than the first time I had been there, and that the town had grown, and that the road was more traveled than it had been last year. Neither of us spoke of Baylor. We passed the fork in the road that it would have once taken us to Forge. Grass grew on that trail. Hap asked if I thought folk would ever settle there again. Fitz says that he hopes not, but sooner or later that the mine is going to bring him back.
Right. There is iron ore there,
Yeah.
So somebody's going to be greedy enough to have a short-term memory.
And from there, Fitz starts telling more stories of Forge and the hardships of the Red Ship War. He told them as tales that he had heard from another and not that he had experienced firsthand. And he didn't necessarily enjoy the telling of it, but he knew that Hap had to learn these stories.
Right.
He has to know the history.
Yeah, and it makes him think about how he should maybe get back to writing the history of that time period for the Six Duchies, because it is really important for others to know all the things that happened so it doesn't get repeated.
And from his musing in his head, Hap asks a question. Was I a Red Ship bastard, Tom? My mouth hung ajar. All my old pain at that word shone fresh in Hap's mismatched eyes. Mishap, his mother had named him. Starling had found him, a scavenging orphan that no one in his village would claim. That was as much as I knew of him. I forced honesty. I don't know, Hap. You could have been Raider-born. I used the kinder term. Starling said I was. I'm an age to be one, and it might be why no one save you would take me in. I'd like to know. I'd like to know who I am. Oh, I finally said into the dangling silence. He nodded hard, twice. His voice was tight when he added, when I said I'd have to tell you about her, Starling said I had the same forged heart as my raping father. I suddenly wished he were smaller, so I could catch him up mid-stride and hug him. Instead, I put my arm around his shoulders and forced him to a halt. The pony ambled along without us. I didn't make him meet my eyes, nor did I let my voice become too grave. I'm going to give you a gift, son. This is knowledge it took me 20 years to gain, so appreciate that I'm giving it to you while you're young. I took a breath. It doesn't matter who a man's father is. Your parents made a child, but it's up to you to make the man you'll be. I held his gaze for a moment. Then, come on, let's go home. So they walk a little bit with Fitz's arm around him until Hap reaches up, claps him on the shoulder, and Fitz lets him go.
Right.
Lets him think his own thoughts and walk on his own.
And his
thoughts of Starling were not charitable.
Yeah, mine either. So
Yes.
Ugh, horrible. I think this is a really cute scene because it's something that I think Fitz can really relate to, that sort of feeling of being a bastard son and wanting to know about your past, but also sort of wanting to rise above that. And obviously there's a little bit of a difference between being the bastard son of a prince and of a raider. So a lot there's a lot there that can't be shared, but I think it's really nice of Fitz to share that it's not about your parents and it doesn't matter who your parents are. It's up to you to decide who you're going to be. You're not like them and you don't have to be like your parents if you don't want to be. And I think that's a really important message that Fitz can give to Hap in this moment of like, even if your father was this horrible person, that's not who you are.
Right.
You are a separate entity.
Yeah.
And I think it's nice also of him to give that space to like be a companion and give comfort in a fatherly way, but also be able to just let him go think his own thoughts. And,
yeah,
I don't know.
So on their way home, they meet up with Night Eyes, and of course they are speaking to one another about Hap leaving, and Night Eyes is like, that doesn't make any sense. We're diminished by the loss of his strength. We grow no younger, you and I. And Fitz is arguing, the typical human versus wolf side, like, well, that makes sense for him to go then. He doesn't need to spend all of his days caring for us. Night Eyes is like, yeah, but we're going to look after his cubs when he's hunting, and like, it works out. We're pack. And Fitz is like, this is a human thing.
This is how human packs work.
And what of us, then, when he is gone? I've told you, perhaps we shall travel again. Ah, yes, leave a cozy den and a predictable food supply. That makes as much sense as sending the boy away. I let his thought hang unanswered, for he was right. Perhaps the restlessness Chade had stirred in me had been the last gasp of my youth. Perhaps I should have bought that wife-finding charm from Jinna. From time to time I had considered the idea of looking for a wife, but it seemed too perfunctory a way to take a mate. Some did so, I knew. They found somebody with shared goals and grew to love one another. But Fitz says that he can't do that because he had experienced a relationship not only founded on years of knowing one another, but blessed with the heady intoxication of genuine love. So he doesn't think he could settle for anything less. And it would not be fair to ask another woman to live in Molly's shadow.
It's so interesting to me that that's how he remembers Molly, considering they were like in a relationship for a year, maybe. And in that year, he traveled a bunch to kill forged ones and was away a lot. So
at war.
Yeah. I don't know. I just find that kind of interesting.
So they finally get back to the cottage, go inside, put the trade goods away, kindle a fire, put the kettle on, and add the few coins we had gained to Hap's small hoard. It wasn't going to be enough, I grudgingly admitted. I should have started saving for this years ago, I observed sourly as Hap came in from outside. Too late to think that way, he observed as he took up his cup. We have to start from where we are. Exactly. Do you think you and Night Eyes could manage here for the rest of the summer while I hired out? He met my gaze levelly. Why should you be the one to hire out? The money would go for my apprenticeship. I experienced an odd little shift in perception. Because I was bigger and stronger and could earn more was no longer true. His shoulders were as wide as mine, and any test of endurance his young back would probably hold out better. He grinned sympathetically as he saw me grasp what he already knew. Perhaps because it is something that I'd like to give you, I said quietly, and he nodded, understanding what those words really meant. You've already given me more than I could ever pay back, including the ability to go after this for myself. Those were the words we went to bed on, and he went to bed smiling. He's very proud of his boy.
He is proud of his boy, and that's great. And I'm glad that Hap is an independent young man. But I think that sort of statement makes me sad because he's saying that he feels like what Fitz is doing is something he needs to pay back. And like, this is sort of, I don't know, he feels like he's a burden to Fitz in a way, it feels like.
Yeah.
And so he's trying to do this for himself to be less of a burden or something. And I feel like Fitz really missed the opportunity to say, well, you don't need to pay me back. That's what children do. Like, you're my son. I don't know, just sort of reaffirm that relationship of like, well, you're my son. Why would you pay me back? Like, that's what parents do. That's what we're here for. But that sort of gets skipped over, and he's more thinking about how, wow, I really I don't know what I did because it kind of feels like I didn't do anything. And now here he is, an independent man. And I'm proud that he's told me he can go his own way.
Well, that night, he still dreams. He doesn't have the full satisfaction of contact with another skilled user, but this dream was tantalizing with possibility, where I felt that I rode with an individual mind rather than sampling the stray thoughts of a crowd. Seemed as much a memory as vision. So in this dream, he's ghosting through the Great Hall at Buckkeep. There's a bunch of people decked out in their finery. It's like a ball or a gala or some sort of event. There's music and dancers, but this person is moving slowly through standing folk conversing with one another.
He's also, whoever this person is, doesn't want to talk to anybody, doesn't want to be at this party. He wants to be anywhere but here.
I could have not been more uninterested. For a moment, my eye was caught by a fall of gleaming bronze hair. The girl's back was to me. Several rings rode on the slender hand that lifted to nervously tug her collar straight. As if she felt my gaze, she turned. She had caught my eyes on her, and she blushed pink as she curtsied deeply to me. I bowed to her, proffered some greeting, and moved on through the crowd. I could feel her looking after me. It annoyed me. And even more annoying was to see Chade, so tall and elegant behind the queen's chair. He too had been watching me. He bent now to whisper something in her ear, and her eyes came unerringly to me. A small gesture of her hand beckoned me to join them there. My heart sank. Would I never have time that was my own, to do as I pleased? Bleakly and slowly I moved to obey her.
Oh yeah, that's Fitz's son, all right.
Yeah, exactly. That's our first glimpse at Dutiful.
Yeah.
Of being uninterested in all the balls and galas and wanting to do his own thing.
He's a little mopey and just wants to forge his own path, which is seemingly the farcier trait. So, hey, welcome to the family, bud.
And then the dream changed. I sprawled on a blanket before a hearth. I was bored. It was so unfair. Below, they danced, they ate, and here I was, a ripple in the dream. No, not bored, simply not engaged with anything. Idly, I unsheathed my claws and inspected them. A bit of bird down was caught under one of them. I freed it, then cleaned my whole paw thoroughly before dozing off before the fire again. What was that? Amusement tinged the sending from Night Eyes. And Fitz just goes back to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So we also get the cat that Dutiful is trying to bond to.
Yes.
That is filled with another spirit.
Yeah. And so that makes it not his wit partner, right? It's like a weird...
So because they're the piebald, from what I remember, and we'll get into it as the book goes on, but from what I remember, the piebalds are trying to lure him out with the hope of bonding this cat. Of like, hey, I can be your wit partner if you do these things.
Right.
So they're trying to lure him away to kidnap him. And this cat also has the spirit of like the sister of, or the brother, I think the sister of like the lead piebald person that we meet.
Yeah, whoever it was originally wit bonded to.
Yeah.
And so there's like two beings. And I know that I think Dutiful does wit bond with the cat's spirit.
Yeah.
But because it's like split into whenever a human is in control, there's like no bond. I don't know. It's like a really confusing thing that we'll definitely get into as we get there.
But through that connection with Dutiful's wit, I'm assuming that's why we hop over to this cat and get these thoughts from this human cat.
Yeah.
Being like, it's boring here. They're all dancing and singing down there. I wish I could be down there.
Yeah, I wish I could be part of that. So, yeah, a little glimpse into the future, what the future holds.
So the next morning, Fitz doesn't really remember much. He just puts it down to like idle wonderings and, the memories stirred up.
Yeah, it's probably memories because it was Buckkeep and he's been there. He does not put two and two together that this is probably from Dutiful. This is just his memory in a dream. This is not anything to look into, which is a little bit frustrating as a reader or rereader. Because it feels like he should know the difference between a memory and skilling. And he's sort of being purposefully obtuse in this.
Yeah. Well, the next day, Hap's travel pack is all ready to go. And Fitz is like, today? And Hap's like, yeah, better start now.
It can't start sooner.
So he has a plan of going to some place where the hay is standing ready. And then beyond that, there's another rumor that he heard of more work. So he's going to keep going until there's no work and then come back after that, hopefully making enough money.
Right. And at first he just has the 2 places he's going to go. And when Fitz says, and then you'll come home, he mentions, well, I figured I'd just keep going.
Unless I heard of more work. Yeah.
And so it's sort of this sad moment of Fitz needing to let go of Hap and Hap sort of trying to be uber independent. And Fitz doesn't let him go right away and fusses over him and gives him a few coins in case of emergency and
made him pack extra food.
Yeah. And, Hap is all annoyed because he doesn't need all that and he's going to sleep on the road and nobody's going to pickpocket him.
And Night Eyes insists Fitz ask him if he wants to take Night Eyes along with him. And Hap's like, oh, it might be a bit much for the old fellow.
Right, which we never get a response. We don't get to hear how Night Eyes takes being called old.
Right.
But he is called old by Hap, and Hap isn't sure that he'd be any use.
And Fitz watches him walk down the road and wonders if he had ever been so insufferably young and sure of himself. But the ache in Fitz's heart had the pleasant afterglow of pride as well. So he is proud of Hap, but worried for him.
Right.
And then the rest of the day was oddly difficult to fill for him. He just couldn't seem to do anything. He starts a project, he sets it down. He starts something else, he sets it down.
Right. And it's not from lack of things to do. There's definitely a lot that needs to get done. It's just sort of this unrestfulness that is in the wake of Hap leaving.
Staring off into the distance and realizing he was doing that, he walked to the cliffs for no other reason than just to look a couple times. And he just couldn't do anything. He found himself listening and waiting without knowing for what. In the midst of splitting and stacking firewood, I halted. Carefully not thinking, I raised my axe and drove it into the chopping block. I picked up my shirt and slung it over my sweaty shoulder and headed toward the cliffs. Night Eyes was suddenly in front of me. What are you doing? Taking a short rest. No, you're not. You're going down to the cliffs, to skill. My thoughts were formless. I was just going there for the breeze. Once you're there, you'll try to skill. You know you will. I can feel your hunger as plainly as you do. My brother, please, please don't. His thought rode on a keening whine. Never had I seen him so desperate to dissuade me. It puzzled me. Then I won't, if it worries you so. So he wrenches his axe out, goes back to work, and realizes he's attacking it with a fury now.
Yeah, now he is putting too much energy in. And he keeps doing that with all of the chores.
Yeah, when he's done with the wood, he picks up his shirt to go to the cliffs again, and Night Eyes is there.
Saying, don't do this, brother.
Yeah, I already told you I wouldn't, so he turns aside from it and attacks other chores, like you said. And it's just, he's burning through work as a lightning fire burns through a summer meadow. My back and arms ached, not just with weariness, but with the complaints of old injuries, and still I dared not be still. The skill hunger tugged at me, refusing to be ignored.
He even gets to the point to try to avoid the skill hunger where he doesn't really want to eat, but he decides to make himself a big dinner because then he has to eat. He forces himself to do everything to make the big dinner, to make a whole thing out of it, to wash the dishes, slowly clean up, and then go lay in bed. And he lays in bed all night long.
Well, he tries, before he tries to like write stuff down or like get out his inks and stuff, and he's like, well, I can't do this. So he just starts mending things just to keep himself busy. And then he lays down finally, like, well, it's really late. I have to try to go to sleep sometime.
And he thinks about how he just feels so lonely, to which Night Eyes responds, it's not the loneliness that eats at you like this. And he doesn't know what to say with that. So he stays in bed until the break of dawn and then gets up to start all over again.
Yep, he's attacking more chores and doing more things. And all of a sudden, Night Eyes turns his head towards the lane. Someone comes. Hap? Hope surged in me. No.
And it's been several days at this
Yes,
point.
it's been
So
several days.
multiple days have passed, and he's just sort of working in a feather and just trying to stay away from the skill hunger. And so now this stranger has come, and it's not a stranger at all. It's Jinna.
We were both staring down the shaded lane when Jinna came in sight. She paused a moment, unnerved perhaps by the intensity of our gazes, then lifted a hand in greeting. "Hello, Tom Badgerlock. Here I am to take up your offer of hospitality." "A friend of Hap's," I explained to Night Eyes. He still hung back and regarded her warily as I went to meet her. "Welcome. I didn't expect to see you so soon," I said, and then heard the awkwardness of my words. "An unexpected pleasure is always the most welcome," I added to mend the moment, and then realized that such gallantry was just as inappropriate. Had I completely forgotten how to deal with people? Yes, Fitz, you have.
Yes.
Jinna's smile put me at ease. Seldom do I hear such honesty, harnessed with such fair words, Tom Badgerlock. "Is that water cool?" And she straightens up a little bit, takes advantage of the water barrel there, says, "Oh, that's better. At the end of a long day's walk, I envy folk like you with a settled life and a place to call your own." And then Fitz kind of responds like, "Well, the grass is always greener from where you're standing." So sometimes we wonder if adventure would suit us better.
And then he asks if she'd like to join him for an evening meal because he was just about to prepare.
She observes, "A bit unusual, a wolf as a watchdog." I often lied to people, insisting that Night Eyes was merely a dog that looked like a wolf. Something told me that this would be an insult to Jinna. I gave her the truth. "I adopted him as a cub. He's been a good companion to me." "So Hap told me, and that he does not like to be stared at by strangers, but will come to me when he's made up his mind about me. And as usual, I'm telling a tale by starting in the middle. I passed Hap upon the road a few days ago. He was in high spirits with every confidence that he will find work and do well. I do believe that he will. The boy has such a friendly, engaging manner that I cannot imagine anyone not welcoming him. He assured me again of a warm welcome here, and of course he spoke true." And then they enter in the cabin, and she says, "Well, what are we cooking? I don't want to stand here. I might as well help." So
Yes, I've never been able to sit still in a kitchen.
Yep.
And this sort of speaks to the type of person Jinna is. She sort of comes into Fitz's life and takes over things as though she belongs there. He notes that
comfortably sharing.
Yeah, he notes that it's really pleasant that he hasn't really shared a kitchen with a woman since his year with the Witted folk when he was training.
And
so
Holly didn't really talk, and Jinna likes to.
yeah, Jenna's talking, and so it's really sort of a novel thing where she's helping along, and she has a gift of not making him feel weird about her just using his things. Like, and whenever she takes something to use, he never feels like territorial about it or like it's weird that she's acting like it's her own. It just always feels comfortable.
And those thoughts bleed over to Night Eyes, so Night Eyes eventually comes over as well, and she was unruffled by how he just snapped up all the fish trimmings. So they're kind of comfortably passing the time cooking, and all of a sudden a meal appears.
Yeah. It seemed that dinner appeared on the table with no real effort from anyone. And she even thinks to make bread for Night Eyes, which Fitz notes that he eats more out of politeness than hunger. But she made something for Night Eyes, which is really nice.
Fitz brings out the Sand's Edge brandy, and she says, "Now this is the perfect end to a good meal," and they take it over to the hearth. So, and she settles herself on the floor beside the wolf. Night Eyes did not even twitch an ear.
Then Jinna notices that there are the pots of ink and paper also scattered around Fitz's home. And she notes that, "I knew you made inks and dyes, but from what I see, you employ them as well. Are you a scribe of some kind?" I gave a desultory shrug. "Of sorts," I admitted. "I do not attempt the fancy work, though I do simple illustrations. My lettering is no better than passable. For me, there is a satisfaction in taking knowledge and committing it to paper, where it is accessible to all." "To any who could read," Jinna amended my words. "That is true," I conceded. She cocked her head at me and smiled. "I don't think I approve." I was startled, not just that she disagreed with such a thing, but that she could do it so pleasantly. Why not? "Perhaps knowledge should not be available to all. Perhaps it should be earned, parceled out from master to worthy student only, rather than committed to paper when anyone who chances upon it may claim it for himself. I confess to some of the same doubts myself, I replied, thinking of the skill scrolls that Chade now studied. And yet I have known cases in which a master died an untimely death, and all she knew went with her before it could be passed on to her chosen pupil. Generations of knowledge were lost in one death. Tragic, Jinna replies. So there's a sort of interesting conversation happening where we have Fitz on the side of education for all and Jinna sort of on the side of you need to earn it.
Yeah.
And sort of this interesting back and forth where Fitz admits that, yeah, sometimes he does feel the same way, that it shouldn't just be for anybody to stumble upon, but also what happens when the people who know die.
Yeah, and Jinna agrees with him there, saying that usually some master's knowledge is their own, they pass it down to the apprentice, and that would be a loss. And Fitz presses that advantage, saying, consider someone such as yourself. You practice a trade that is much an art woven of secrets and skills shared only by those others who practice hedge magic. You have no apprentice at all that I have seen, yet I would wager that there are aspects of your magic that are yours alone, and ones that would die with you if you perish tonight. There's a chill thought to dream on, she replied Riley.
Also, like, Fitz, she's alone with a man that she barely knows. And you're like, man, if you died tonight, all your knowledge would go with you. Okay. Just a little bit of a creepy thought before bed.
But she also replies, there's another thought, Tom. I have no letters. I could not put my knowledge in such a form unless someone such as yourself aided me. And then I would not be certain if you had truly put down what I know or what you thought I had told you. That is half of teaching an apprentice, making sure the youngster learns what you said, not what she thinks you said. Very true. How often had I thought I understood Chade's directions only to come to disaster when I tried to mix the concoction on my own? Another little ripple of uneasiness went through me as I thought of Chade trying to teach Prince Dutiful from the scrolls. Would he teach what some forgotten skill master had committed to paper, or only his understanding of it? I pulled my thoughts back from that unsettling notion. I had no duty there. I had warned him, and that was as much as I could do. And conversation lags, and eventually they go to bed.
Right, with Jinna taking Hap's cot. So, yeah, I think this is really interesting because Fitz, prior to this conversation, had sort of been at peace with whatever Chade was going to do.
Right. Or at least putting it out of his mind.
Yes.
Like, I don't need to think about this anymore. No temptation for me.
Exactly. And then having this talk with Jinna really brings to the forefront just how dangerous it is to let Chade be the teacher.
Right.
And I think on the whole, it's Chade mostly that makes me nervous, not like anyone who could read the scrolls and try to teach Dutiful. It's mostly that Chade doesn't know limits, and he's really bad at like pushing limits, even if he is aware that they're there.
Yeah.
So I can see why his fear is growing.
So they're wrapping up for the night, doing some final chores outside, and Night Eyes remarks to Fitz, on nights such as this, we used to hunt together. That we did. It would be a good night for hunting. The moon will make the game restless and easy to see. Nevertheless, he followed me as I turned back toward the hut. Regardless of how well we both recalled it, neither of us were the young wolves we had once been. Our bellies were full, the hearth was warm, and rest might ease the dull ache in Night Eyes' haunches. Dreams of hunting would have to suffice tonight. So again, another reminder that they're getting old, and yet Fitz is like 35. So,
yeah, so
I mean, he has the aches of a lot of wounds and scars, and like there was an arrow in his back. His leg was gimped at one point. He was tortured to death.
Yeah, no, there is definitely a lot that has happened to Fitz that makes him not your typical 35-year-old.
Yes.
So not that 35 is necessarily old, but it isn't necessarily young and spry either. I think that's comfortable territory of you're starting to become a grown-up and have grown-up pains. And that's probably made older by the fact that he is bonded with Night Eyes, who is sort of more geriatric of a companion.
Yeah.
So, yeah, neither of them are as young as they used to be.
So he wakes up in the morning to Jinna in the kitchen, already kind of getting stuff ready to go. And she apologizes if it seems that she's made herself too comfortable and says, no, it's fine. But he feels a little bit odd about it. But he goes out and does his chores. And when he comes back, there's food ready for breakfast. She offered me thanks for the hospitality and added, before I go, perhaps we might do a bit of trading. Would you consider a charm or two for my stocking in exchange for some of your yellow and blue inks? I found out that I was glad to delay her leaving, not only because of her company was pleasant, but because I had always been intrigued by hedge magic. Here was an opportunity, perhaps, for a closer look at the tools of her trade. So they seal up some inks for her, and she remarks that using colors in some of her charms seemed to increase their efficacy, but that this was an area in which she was still making discoveries. Fitz doesn't pry because he seems like that might be rude and prying into her secrets at this point.
Even though he'd really love to know what she's talking about.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to be rude.
So they return to the house and she sets the pots of dye on the table and opens her own pack. She spreads a number of bagged charms on the table. What will you choose, Tom Badgerlock? I have charms for verdant gardens, for hunter's luck, for healthy babes. That's small use to you. Let me put that one back. Ah, here's one you might find useful. She whisked the cover off a charm. As she did so, Night Eyes let out a low growl. His hackles stood as he stalked to the door and nosed it open. I found myself backing away from the object she revealed. Short rods of wood marked with shrieking black symbols were fastened to each other at chaotic angles. Ominous beads were dangerously interspersed with them. A few tortured tufts of fur, twisted and fixed with pitch, clung to it. The object both offended and distressed me. I would have fled if I had dared take my eyes off it. I abruptly felt the wall of the cabin against my back. I pressed against it, knowing that there was a better path to escape, but unable to think what it was. I beg your pardon. Jinna's gentle words came from a vast distance. I blinked, and the object was gone, mantled in the cloth and hidden from my sight. Outside the door, Night Eyes' low growl rose to a whistling whine and ceased. I felt as if I had surfaced from deep waters. It had not occurred to me, Jinna apologized as she thrust the charm deep into her pack. It's intended to keep predators away from chicken houses and sheep pens, she explained. I got my breath back. Her gaze did not meet mine. Apprehension hung like a miasma between us. I was witted, and now she knew it. How would she employ that knowledge? Would she merely be disgusted, frightened, scared enough to bring destruction down on me? I imagined Hap returning to a burned-out cabin. Jinna suddenly looked up and met my eyes as if she had overheard my thoughts. A man is as he is made. A man can't help how he's made. That's so, I muttered in response, shamed at how relieved I felt. And then she continues on as if the incident hadn't occurred.
Right. So first big thing is that hedge magic is real. This is pretty evident in Fitz's reaction that something about this is real.
Yeah, these charms seem to work.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's from magic or not, but we do know that the magic system in this world is sort of a circle, and so this is probably just the furthest away from wit and skill.
Or at least, the circle is how Chade describes it.
Yes.
And we're kind of taking that as truth because he seems to know a lot about the different kinds of magic.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I find it really interesting that there's this other magic that we don't really get a ton of, that we have to keep, I don't know, that we'll get to see a little bit more of in this book, but we don't get too much of, unfortunately. But it is really interesting to think about the fact that there is another magic type. And I really want to know if this is something that you're born innately capable of, like skill and wit, or if this is something that you just learn.
I think it's something that you just learn. However, we learn later that Jinna learned her trade from her father, I believe. So It could be an innate thing, but I feel like it's something that you learn.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I guess I feel like we don't know enough hedge witches to know if it's normal to, like, I don't know, test your apprentices to make sure that they can produce whatever is needed to make these charms efficient or work.
Yeah, true. So eventually she digs through her contents and pulls one out saying, will you hang one near your garden and encourage your green things to prosper? Fitz is still kind of recovering from his fear, and he nods and is very tense when she reveals that charm, but obviously it doesn't do anything then because it's for a garden. So he's relieved at that. And then she says, "You'll have to give me your hand so I can tune it to you. Then we'll take it outside and adjust it for your garden. Half the charm is for the garden, half for the gardener." So she grabs his hands, puts his hand in hers first, and this is like, "No, palm up first. I gotta read your palms here."
Mm-hmm. And Fitz talks a little bit about how Chade taught him how to read palms, but not in the same way. He taught him how to read palms in how to see what a man has done with his life,
Yes.
like the callousing for a scribe versus a soldier. Like there are different ways, different things about hands that you can tell.
Yep.
Things about people, but this doesn't seem to be what Jinna's doing. She's actually reading the lines on the palms.
"You're an odd one, Tom, and make no mistake. Were they not both at the ends of your arms, I'd say these were the hands of two different men. It's said that your left hand tells you what you were born with, and your right hand what you have made of yourself. But even so, such differences in a man's two hands I've seldom seen. Look what I see in this hand. A tender-hearted boy, a sensitive young man, and then your lifeline stops short on your left hand." As she spoke, she let go of my right hand. She set her forefinger to my left palm, and her nail traced a tickling line to where my life ended. Were you Hap's age, I'd be fearing I was looking at a young man soon to die. But as you're sitting there across from me, and your right hand bears a nice long lifeline, we'll go by it, shall we? She released my left hand and took my right in both of hers. "I suppose so," I conceded uncomfortably. It was not only her words that made me ill at ease. The simple warm pressure of her hands gripping mine had made me suddenly aware of Jinna as a woman. I was experiencing a very adolescent response to it. I shifted in my chair. The knowing smile that flickered over her face discomfited me even more. "So, an avid gardener, I see, one devoted to the knowing of many herbs and their uses." I made a neutral noise. She had seen my garden, so she could kind of surmise that. Fitz is thinking. She studies the hand a little bit more. "Left or right, it's not an easy hand to read, Tom. By your left hand, I'd say you had a sweet and true love in your short life, a love that ended only in your death. Yet here in your right hand, I see a love that wends its way in and out of all your many years. That faithful heart has been absent for a time, but is soon to return to you again." She lifted her clear hazel eyes to mine to see if she had scored true. Had Hap been telling her tales of Starling? Scarcely what I would call a faithful heart. When I said nothing, she returned her attention to my hands. "Look here, see this? Anger and fear shackled together in a dark chain. It follows your lifeline, a black shadow over it." I pushed aside the uneasiness her words roused in me, and he flippantly says, "It's probably just dirt." She gave a small snort of amusement and shook her head again.
So before we keep going, I do want to touch back on this specific note of his love line. Also the lifeline. So the lifeline being cut short in the hand of his past, and then being long in the other hand is really interesting because we know he did die.
Yeah,
His life was cut short when he was young. And there too, to the love, I find it really interesting that on his one hand, he has a love that was true up until his death. But on the other hand, he has a love that is winding and faithful, coming back at multiple points in his life or intertwining with his life. And I feel as though the first love is for sure Molly.
Right.
And the second love feels a lot more like Beloved.
Yes.
That is the love. Because, I mean, I guess you could make the argument that it's also about Molly because Molly does come back into his life. But it's only the one encounter.
Right.
There's no like breaking apart and coming back together over and over again the way there is with the Fool. And I sort of like that they are soulmates in a way. That's being foretold that he's this faithful love that will follow him throughout the rest of his life.
Well, the next chapter is called Tawny Man.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. So it's definitely about the Fool. Canon.
"Never have I seen two palms so unlike on the same man. I suspect that sometimes you wonder if you even know who you are yourself. I'm sure every man wonders that from time to time. But you, perhaps, have more honest reason to wonder it than others. Well, let me see what I can do." So she takes the charm and rearranges the beads, adds an extra bead, paints and outlines some runes on there, and kind of in her magic way tunes it to Fitz. So it's more personalized. And then says, "Come now, we have to adjust this to the garden." So they go outside and she sends him to find a stick to put it on. And when he comes back, she has dug a little hole in a corner of the plot. And they attach them together and then stick the stick into the hole. And there's a little bell on there to scare away some of the birds. And there it is.
It's also mentioned when she's inside changing a little bit of the charm, she uses the yellow ink to write runes, and then says that she thinks next time she comes or next year, she'll find out that any of the crop that's touched by sun had the best year ever.
Yeah.
So potentially the yellow is being used to do that. It's connection with the sun. Who knows? But it seems like she's sort of interested to see what will happen.
Yeah. It pleases me to leave it here, and when I next come, I shall be interested to see how well it has worked for you. It was the second time she had mentioned visiting again. The ghost of my court manners nudged me. And when next you come, you shall find yourself as welcome as you were this time. I shall look forward to your visit. The smile she gave me dimpled her cheeks more deeply. Thank you, Tom. I shall certainly stop here again. She cocked her head at me and spoke with a sudden frankness. I know you are a lonely man, Tom. That won't always be so. I could tell that, at first, you doubted the power of my charms. You still doubt the truth of what I can see in the palm of a man's hand. I don't. Your one true love is stitched in and out and through your life. Love will return to you. Don't doubt that. Her eyes were meeting his so earnestly that he could neither laugh nor frown at her, so he just nods mutely to her. As she shoulders her pack and strode off down the lane, I watched her go. Her words tugged at me, and hopes long denied struggled to grow. I thrust them away from me. Molly and Byrrc belonged to one another now. There was no place for me in their lives. I squared my shoulders. I had chores to do, wood to stack, fish to put by, and a roof to mend. So he heads back to chores. And it's interesting, once again, we've been talking so often about how he reacts to Molly and his feelings towards Molly because of his forging, but never once has he thought about the fool.
No.
Never once has he thought like, oh, I miss this person, or this person's going to come back to me at all, because it's just, I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something to do with the way they parted.
They had like a finality in their parting, I guess.
Mm-hmm. And I'm sure Fool didn't make it seem like he'd ever come back, so...
Yeah.
I don't know. Very interesting things to think on, and... Yeah. I don't know. Fitz is so interesting to me as a person because he is stunted in some ways with his personal growth and mature in others, and like you can tell time has healed some of the things that has happened to him, but not all, probably due to him forging those parts away. But there is sort of this relationship that he has with himself and those around him that's really affected by all that has happened last book, surprisingly, because it happened to him. But yeah, I don't know. I just really enjoyed this. I kind of really love this idea that his true love will come back to him. And the next chapter, his true love does come back to him. But I think it's interesting to think also of true love as something that isn't necessarily fully romantic, like in this series, because I know that Fitz does care for Beloved a lot and is really anti the idea of being intimate with Beloved, but then there are really intimate moments that aren't sex that happen between those two that are like, I mean, especially I think of the final trilogy with them, you know, him taking care of Beloved and cradling Beloved and sleeping next to Beloved when Beloved has these horrid nightmares. Like there is just so much love and care in that relationship, and I think it's really interesting to have such a important relationship span throughout this series that isn't about the intimacy. It's not necessarily a romantic relationship in that way.
Yeah.
And that's not something that you get a lot, especially in fantasy books.
It's also really interesting because Robin Hobb insists that there's no romantic feelings there whatsoever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the words and how it's written is in a romantic sense. Like Fitz describes the fool and beloved and Amber as like in beautiful terms
Yeah.
that a lot of the other characters don't.
Mm-hmm.
They think that Amber is very masculine and not very good looking.
Yeah.
Like we noted that with Kenneth too. It's like, oh, this goddess standing up there.
Yeah.
So we have very interesting words coming from Fitz describing the fool, and also abhorrent of any sort of like notion that they could be coupled up together. And, you know, like in Beloved's terms, kind of fixated on the plumbing, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But at the same time, I've read a lot of discourse that their relationship is straight up written like a romantic relationship in another book.
Yeah. I mean, truly, I do feel that way. I mean, obviously not every reader has to feel that way, but I do really feel like the way that Fitz cares about Fool goes beyond just friendship. And I mean, I'm not saying that two men can't be friends and they have to be in love, because I think that's not something that I believe either. But I think in this particular case, well, I guess beloved also isn't a man. Beloved is beloved.
True.
Very
Yeah.
fluid. And I think.
And not a human.
And not a human. But I think that we definitely see Fitz have friends that don't go this deep.
Yeah.
And the only other. I mean, honestly, sometimes the way that he cares for beloved goes deeper than the things that we see him care about Molly with. Or like the way he cares for Molly. He definitely cares for Molly, and they definitely have a romantic relationship later. But I think in some ways it is deeper with beloved.
There's those barriers, right?
Yeah.
Like Fitz is keeping a part of himself separate from Molly still.
Yeah. Even when things have gotten better. And yeah, I think definitely there's something to say to having a person where you get to be all of yourself and not just parts. And that, like, how is that not a relationship? How is that not, more than platonic?
Yeah.
But I don't know.
We start to explore that in this book, though, with the next chapter, I think.
Yeah. So excited to get there. Mm-hmm. Excited to see Beloved again. And just as like a heads up, because I know last trilogy we were going by she, her, and as a reminder for Amber, we're trying to sort of stick to the pronouns that Beloved uses in each book.
Yes.
So this book, it'll be back to he, him, because he's
Lord Golden.
Lord Golden. So that's where we stand on that one. And we're just following Beloved's lead.
How do you feel about hedge magic? We got our introduction to it. To me, it seems like just kind of the charms. That's the magic part about it. Everything else is kind of like, meh. Because it's like packets of spices. Maybe the well wishes maybe could have some magic ascribed to it, but like I feel like it's just kind of the charms themselves.
I mean, how do you make the charms then? Like the charms mixed together become magic? That's
the knowledge, Like that's the magic part of it, I'm saying.
Okay.
But like the charms are like the only kind of visible part of hedge magic, and that requires that magic to make the charms.
So you don't think the palm reading is magic in any way?
I don't necessarily believe it's magic, no, but I believe they're taught to do that.
Okay. Interesting. I don't know. I think it's magic. I think it's why wouldn't it be in my mind? Because magic is real in this universe, so why can't it also be a magic? So yeah, I'd like to believe that it's a magic ability that Jinna has, and maybe she just needs a medium. It's not like skilling where you can just do it. You have to have a medium to do it through, like reading a palm or scrying in a bowl or putting together a charm packet that keeps pestilence away from your garden. I don't know. I feel as though it's a magic of some sort.
Anything else about this chapter? Got our introduction to Jinna here.
Yeah. Anything you wanted to add?
I feel like how old do you picture Jinna?
I picture her to be like late 30s, early 40s.
Okay. Really funny because I think you're about a decade off.
Really?
Yeah. I don't know for sure, but I was reading about Jinna, and I think this is in the text, and I remember it vaguely once I was reminded from my online searches. So we'll get there in the middle later in this book. But Fitz pretends to be 7 years older than he actually is, like 42 or something like that.
Okay.
Because he has all the scarring.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
he pretends to be older. I believe it's somewhere mentioned that he's pretending to be about as much older as he thinks Jinna is younger than him, actually. So she's about 30, like 29, something like that.
Oh, well, the way he
or at
talks
least
about her.
29.
He just described her as a woman in her middle years.
Approaching middle years, yeah.
Yeah, I don't feel like approaching middle years is 29, but maybe that's
Six
coming
duchies?
from bias.
If you're
I'm
30,
literally turning 29 in a few days. So
if you're 39 or 35, that's maybe middle years for six duchies.
I mean, is
70?
it? I don't know. And I guess she's just like blind, relatable. Also, I guess if I didn't have glasses, I would be
about the same.
Yeah. I don't like that. I don't like that idea that he's describing her as a woman approaching her middle years and she might be my age, but hey, to each our own. Maybe I am approaching my middle years. Who knows? Only Saw could tell us.
Yeah, that's we'll figure that out for sure, but maybe around 29 or so.
Crazy. Fitz is so bad at ages and people. I don't know.
Well, thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you have thoughts about this chapter, please email us at isfitshappy@gmail.com, or you can message us on any of our social medias, where it is Fitshappy at Facebook, Instagram. We're on Blue Sky. We're on Threads and YouTube.
Yeah.
Reddit. So yeah, let us know what you got going on, what you're thinking about this chapter. Just anything you want to tell us.
Yeah, we look forward to hearing from you. Okay, we get to do our favorite part of the podcast, which is talk about what you guys have brought to us.
Yeah, before we get into those comments and the messages, I do want to shout out Barbara. Thank you so much for tipping us, for donating to our page, supporting us there. It means a lot to us.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Looking forward to this trilogy as well. So let's get into it.
But before we get into stuff about this trilogy, we did get a comment on episode 1 on Spotify.
Yes. Yeah, from Evie Girl on Spotify. And they brought in a wonderful point. And this is a while since we've talked about this, obviously. It's been about 5 years, 251 episodes. We passed 250. Congrats to us. That's awesome. But this comment is about when Regal first sees Fitz. So Fitz is being kept in a stable with Vixen, and Byrrc is there, and Regal's there, and I think Verity too.
Right.
And Regal comes in talking all sorts of like, why don't we get rid of him? Or, you know, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, like he's a danger to the throne just by being alive. Let's just get rid of him. Nobody cares.
And Vixen starts growling.
Yes.
And I think we talked about how that might have been a reaction from Fitz because of his wit, right? And just feeling kind of scared in that.
Yeah, that Vixen picked up on the wit sense from Fitz, and Fitz is scared. But Evie Girl has a different sort of thought. So
we talked about how Vixen might be reacting to Fitz, but Evie Girl reminds us that Byrrc and Vixen have a wit bond, even though Byrrc ignores it and pretends that it doesn't exist. Vixen was most likely reacting to Byrrc's thoughts and his protectiveness and his understanding of what Regal was saying, which makes way more sense because 6-year-old Fitz is not going to grasp the meaning of it.
Exactly.
So thank you very much for pointing that out. That does make way more sense.
Yeah, and I actually love that so much as like a little early nod to the fact that Burek is witted as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know. So really cool. Thank you for pointing that out, Evie girl.
Mm-hmm.
We also have a few emails from some listeners. A really fun one from listener Barbara from the Netherlands, who let us know that, first and foremost, I need to say they tried Sloppy Joes because they'd never heard of them, and that she and her son love them. And you're welcome. They're great. Anybody else
They're
who is not
fantastic.
American who has never heard of Sloppy Joes, highly recommend. As long as you eat meat, highly recommend.
Yeah, exactly.
Caveat, you have to be able to eat meat, but I'm sure you could use Beyond Meat with it. It'd be good. But Barbara also wrote in just some kind words and talking about how they're really excited for the new Fitz trilogy and just getting back to Fitz and Fool and Night Eyes and Six Duchies everything.
Thank you very much for the kind words.
Yeah, thanks, Barbara.
Yeah. We also had an email from Simon. Thank you so much for sending this in. It's not necessarily like a question or even a thought on currently what we're reading, but Simon is rereading the books and going through things again, and a passage that we were talking about sparked a memory that brought up a poem that Simon really likes and kind of related it to that. So Fool asks him why he's come to Buck. Fool asks Fitz.
This is episode 42, our episode 42.
Yes.
It's chapter 12 in
chapter 15? Chapter 15.
Chapter 15.
Yeah.
In
Fitz is
Royal
pretty
Assassin.
high. Yeah, Fitz is pretty high after sucking up all the embers in Trude's room, and Fool makes him ask why he's come to Buck. And Fitz uses this simile about it being as if he'd stirred some embers and stirred up a bright coal. Simon had never thought about this before, but some combination of Robin Hobb's phrasing and the way that we talked about it made Simon think of his favorite poem, which is by Gerard Manley Hopkins, and ends with "Shine and blue bleak embers, ah, my dear, fall gall themselves and gash gold vermilion." And Simon explains that this is basically meaning that the constant plodding of the metal plow polishes the metal plow blade and makes it shine. And if you poke dull embers in a fire, they glow with gold and red. So, just keep going along. Magic will happen, and explains kind of where this poem came from and how it kind of relates to the passage of stirring up this fire and coming up with a glowing coal. If you just keep going at something, the magic will happen. You're living life, eventually you get there. And it's important to find the miraculous in each moment. And Simon, in parentheses, hears, and the failed human is the one who, like Regal or effing Kyle, forms habits and doesn't even know how frozen in time they are. So keep trying new things, keep doing different things, and find the miraculous in that moment, and really kind of relates it to some of his favorite poems there.
Yeah, and how the Fool really emulates that by continuously looking into how every single person has a purpose and is important in the grand scheme and can affect life in many ways, especially with that passage where Fool and Bee are together and looking at the different paths all the people can create.
Yeah.
And so, it's just this overwhelming sense from that little moment of this importance to keep in awe of things around.
Yeah, it just goes to show like the different things that we can pull out of these books, like different passages that Robin Hobb can write can remind you of something completely different that relates in a wonderful way. So thank you for sharing that, Simon. It was really cool to read.
Yeah, we definitely enjoyed that.
All right. So we also have a comment on Podbean, which is our main distributor. So you can comment there as well, and we will see it, just so you know. This is from Amy, and Amy wants to talk on Starling a little bit. So we had some discussions on episode 251, I think last episode, about when Starling was leaving and the confrontation there. And we were talking about why she is this way. why she is so confrontational, why she is so
Yes.
hurtful in their things, why is she just wandering around and taking up the stereotypical bard, of
Yes.
having people in every town.
And yeah, and I mean, most especially what's important to Fitz and his morals is that she's cheating on a husband, I think.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and that's like something that we discuss a little bit.
So Amy really kind of takes the same stance I think that I was going for, in that Starling kind of is acting this way because she thinks she is barren, because she doesn't see self-worth in herself, and is trying to take control of her life in that way. But also deep down does care for Fitz in her own way, and is hurt by his rejection. And because Fitz knows all of her secrets and everything about her, that was the comfortable place that she could go to, even after she was trying to take control of her life in other places. She could come to Fitz and feel like she was the one in control. She was the one bringing him Hap. She was the one who did care for him and wanted to see him in a better place. And I think that's kind of the main message there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know. I think there is sympathy for Starling. I just have more sympathy for her husband. So
Right, yeah.
So like, I don't know. And I'm sure it's not fair. I liked Starling a lot when we first met her at the first trilogy.
Yeah.
And I think I started disliking her as the Fool started disliking her, although I still kept a like pretty healthy balance, I think, between liking and disliking her actions. But I really feel like this was sort of rough. I think it's like made worse by the fact that she is so horrible to Hap, who is a child.
Right.
About all of this.
I know.
I mean, last chapter she wasn't nice to him, and then this chapter we found out that she told him
said worse things.
Yeah, like said even worse. I don't know. I think that makes me care a little bit less about the why she did it, because ultimately it doesn't matter why she still did it. It doesn't excuse.
Yeah.
Like it explains, but it doesn't excuse. And I think that's, but teach their own.
Bastion kind of agrees with you there too on Facebook on episode 251. Says, sad to see that Starling has started her descent into being an unlikable character, but at least she's no Kyle.
Agreed.
And also, Emma, how could you confuse Harry's signature spell, Expelliarmus, with Expecto Patronum?
True. I got it wrong. Fake fan. My bad. Thanks for calling me out. But yes, Bastion also has some interesting thoughts on something that we didn't touch on.
Yeah, the piebalds.
Yeah, it's Fitz's continuous dismissal of piebalds being able to use their animal bonds in a way that people fear, like transferring diseases, dead cattle, and non-migrating fish. And so Bastion's wondering if, why can't this be possible? Why can't they do this? And is it Fitz's blindness to his own morality?
Or is it just his lack of knowledge and wit?
Yeah. What's making him feel like there's absolutely no way this can be true? Like all the stories can be true.
Because Bastion explains that he doesn't believe all of them are true, but why couldn't a piebald who, are known for misusing the bond between their animals bond a rat and have a disease and tell him to go bite somebody, you know, or even without just carrying a plague or something.
Like with the
rats
fish.
carry regular stuff, or has a water animal that's a predator and says like, hey,
keep the fish away
from this and harm the village. There are things that people can do if they are creative and have a bad enough mind.
Yeah, well, and
so.
I think what's really important is sometimes I think that it's this really human thing to view oppressed people as a monolith of people who can do no wrong.
Right.
They're the ones being oppressed. They are not ever capable of evil. I think it's just like a human nature thing to do, because obviously there's a greater evil being done to them. So even when evil does come from them, it's way easier to justify because obviously they've been pushed to a point.
Yeah.
But I think that it is important to note that groups of people are not monoliths, and especially with this wit group, sure, the wit people and community that Fitz knows may not have ever done these things, and not necessarily because they're incapable, but because their morality makes them incapable of doing it. Like that's just a line they wouldn't want to cross, and they are people who want to stay away from the limelight. They don't really even care about non-witted people. And so, of course, to Fitz, it's crazy that any of this could be true.
Right.
But when you have something like this piebald group that's being formed because they're tired of being unjustly attacked, and they have less scruples about going against the normal flow and attacking in ways that other people wouldn't, I think it is good to be critical of, like, yeah, they probably are capable of doing that. And some of them probably are. And I don't know. I think it's just really interesting to think about it from the perspective of Fitz, who isn't in danger and isn't constantly at threat. He doesn't live a lifestyle where that's something that is the main thing he needs to worry about.
Right.
Like, he has so much other things going on that I really feel like wit often takes a back seat. And so for these people, it's just a completely different way of life. And so they're reacting in completely different ways. And sort of just like saying, I don't want to take this oppression anymore. And the way that they're doing about it is not great usually, but I don't know. I feel like both can be true, that it is possible and also that they're not doing it.
Yeah, I think some of them are possible. I just think some of them are on too big of a scale for these isolated incidences, you know?
Yeah.
It's very similar and in line with Robin Hobb's thinking, or at least her writing at this point, I think, of having everyone blame it on the old blood and the witted, including like this scene that we just read in this chapter in the market of just like, it's always got to be their fault, right? They're the common enemy, to kind of drum up that sympathy for them when we see them act as the villains later on.
Right. And I think especially when you have, like, with this chapter as an example, with the cow, there was a cow that was pregnant that wanders away and comes back 2 days later without a baby. And then you find a camp. It's easier to think that somehow, for whatever reason, the piebalds have decided to steal the calf, which, why would they, I guess? But you're not thinking rationally. You're thinking about the lost income,
right?
And how he was probably expecting that calf to help bring more income, and now it's gone. And so I think it's like also coming from this fear and having that common enemy where you don't really have to, it's not anything. I don't know. I have a hard time articulating my thoughts on this, but generally it's easier to have an enemy than just to accept that bad things can happen to you and anyone else.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. So I think in this moment, it's like, yeah, what did a piebald do that? Probably not. Could they have? For sure. But whenever the little piglets are missing, it's not because they hypnotize the pigs to walk away. If they're missing because of a witted person, it's probably because they bonded with the person with the wit. You know what I mean? Like, it's, I don't know. I think partially people not understanding what's capable of the wit, and partially us not understanding what's capable with the wit.
Yeah, that's fair. Fitz just has a blind side to all of it. Well, thank you for those questions. We also have some on episode 249, which was chapter 1 of Fool's Errand. One, Irene says that they didn't remember the incipit, that opening epigraph. And since they're turning 35 this year, it hits a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Fair. Definitely fair.
That's the fun part about coming back to reading books, you know, at different ages, is you really start relating with different characters. Ellen also wrote in to talk about sort of my theory with the fact that the skill woke Fitz's skill craving / dreaming because of its need for him to be Catalyst again. And so that this is a theme that runs very strong in the Soldier's Son trilogy, also by Robin Hobb, where the mages are describing themselves as tools being used by a magic that has its own will. So this is something that occurs in Robin Hobb's head, but I agree it's very unclear if the skill has a conscience of its own or not.
Yeah. And I thought that was like an interesting conversation that we had too, because you're really kind of all about that, like destiny and capital C catalyst, and the world picks him up when he's needed. Because you were talking about reading Wheel of Time at the same time,
Yes. Yeah.
so that's kind of a thread in there, if you will, a
Yes.
thread.
A thread. Thread of the loom.
Yes, exactly. So, and I'm on the kind of other end of it where I think he just is a catalyst, and everyone can be a catalyst. And because of choices other people made, more choices are centering on him again because he's not supposed to be alive.
Right.
So it's just kind of a changing stream that the fool needs to follow along to the next steps. Then ultimately it kind of loops back to Fitz.
Yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to tell. And honestly, I feel like there's arguments for both. I definitely, especially with this chapter, felt like there were a lot of things lining up so that Fitz wouldn't need to go back to Buckkeep, right? And I mean,
lack of money,
needing to happen to a good apprenticeship,
Yep.
and the skill, realizing that the skill can't just be like willy-nilly taught, and it might be actually kind of dangerous, and then being connected to Dutiful through a skill dream. I think all of those things are really setting that up, and you could argue that that's sort of the universe or the skill, like making him into Catalyst again, like forcing him back into the role of Catalyst. However, it's also sort of just writing, you know? It's just how to move the plot along. Like, obviously, if he never has these revelations, he's never going to go back.
Right.
And so it's really hard to tell the line between, is this just a writing choice made to, like, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, that's not done poorly or anything, but is it just a writing choice that Hobb has made that makes it so he goes that way? Or is this sort of the universe at large pulling him in that direction?
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Interesting topics, the meta topics.
Yes. Yeah. Hard to know. No real answer, but I love chatting about it.
We also have some comments on Instagram.
Yes. And one of those comments is from listener Michaela. I'm so sorry if I am butchering that. And they're talking about how they read the different series and how a lot of the order in which that they read the series was due to lack of copies in a native language.
Yeah. Which I thought was very interesting because they are Finnish, and the most of their copies that they were able to get were like audiobooks through English when they were reading. So like switching to live ship traders and getting a different, speaker doing those, talking about serpents and stuff. It's just like way too much to kind of get into in a second language.
And I never thought about this, but also we have to think about the fact that because it's written by a native English speaker, there's a lot of just sort of jargon and dialect in there that makes sense to native English speakers and probably a lot of, people who speak English fluently. But it just is one of those things where if it's not your first or second language, it's your third language, and you're hearing all these weird choices that like you could parcel out. It's just going to take more brain energy. Why would you want to spend time on that when you could read it?
Details in your own.
You can like get more out of which is totally something I've never even thought about. I mean, I've only read a few books in a different language, and it was Spanish, and that's at a third grade level. So, it's not like there wasn't a lot to miss. I still did miss some, but it is, whenever you're doing the different languages, I think that's a really interesting prospect of something I didn't really think about before, that there is just sort of that comfort in reading your own language versus somebody else's, and getting more from it whenever you get to read your own.
Yeah, and the availability of those copies.
Yeah.
Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm still thinking that the Live Ship Traders is not translated into Finnish yet, or maybe it was just not available for this person. But either way,
they found it in Swedish, which is their another language of theirs that they can speak.
Yeah, like the availability thing is also something that I hadn't really thought of because, I don't know, English. We live in English speaking countries, and all of these books are produced in English, so I never had to think about translations before.
Yeah.
I could just like pick up a copy anywhere.
Yeah. Not have to worry. So yeah, it makes more sense that you just read in the order that's available to you. But I thought it was really interesting that Michaela talks about how Hobb is such a good writer that it sort of doesn't matter that you get spoiled and some stuff, and that especially when they decided to skip sort of the Madship trilogy, when they found out about Tawny Man and Amber, it's like, oh, how did Beloved get all this money? I need to go back and find out what happened to get more lore on Amber and what happened there. And so I think it is it is a good mark of a good author that, you know, people don't care if they get spoiled and that they continue to read the books. But
yeah, for sure. Thank you very much for that. It's very interesting.
We love to hear a new and unique perspective. So thank you.
We also have a message from Ifki's ponies, Peculiar Ponies here. Once again with some pictures of their horses and their gorgeous horses. One is Swift, one is Relpta, and then one is named Nim as well. So bonus for the two Realm of the Elderlings names there. But they're talking about how they're glad that we're back, but Tawny Man is their least favorite trilogy of the whole series, and they're very interested in see how we react to things in here. So that's an interesting right off the bat, because I've always heard it as top 2 for most people.
Yeah.
So very curious on thoughts from other people who seem to dislike this set of books in the middle here.
Yes. Also, Ifka's Ponies is saying that they do not agree with the fandom saying that Fitz is a bad dad.
Correct, yeah.
They don't feel that's true, which I go back and forth on. I don't know. I feel like sometimes I think he's not a great dad, and sometimes I'm like, yeah, he's all right. So I don't know. Can anybody truly be a perfect parent? No, probably not.
Well, we also have a comment on episode 249 from Jay Raluark saying that looking forward to Fitz actually being a pretty good dad in the Fitz and Lord Golden dynamic, and the slow hermit lifestyle in the first 10 chapters. So like there are people who believe that he's a pretty good dad actually. And to Hap, from the examples that we have so far, he's not bad.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's more so...
I would be worried if he was raising a kid from a baby, but like Hap coming to him as like a 8-year-old or something really helped him out.
Yeah, for sure. I think more so people think he's a bad dad because of his lack of communication with his biological children.
Yeah.
Until they're a lot more grown.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a great choice on his part, but also we'll give him a break because he's a fictional character and we love him. So, you know, it's fine.
Cozy Ollie is also looking forward to this trilogy very much because of, you know, Dutiful, the creation of the coterie, capitalized Nettle here.
Yes.
Big fan of Nettle. Beloved's return, of course, and then more wit and skill. So lots to look forward to in this trilogy here. Lots of fans of this trilogy. So Peculiar Ponies, let us know why. Let us know why it's not one of your favorites.
Yes.
Very curious.
We also have a message from listener Gil about episode 107, where we discussed Will and how he has a partially severed leg. We were wondering how that could have happened, and Gil just finished rereading The Tawny Man, and after the Pale Woman's dragon quickened, Fitz finds her with stump arms because Kebble Rawbread has tried to pull her into the dragon with him, but her forged servant saved her. Perhaps Girl on a Dragon just took a bite of Will's leg and couldn't consume all of him.
Yeah, which is really interesting because I kind of actually forgot about this part, so thanks for bringing it up. But yeah, Will's partially severed leg is very interesting because it's never explained. And this is a pretty good explanation.
Yeah.
But I always saw like partially severed as like most of the leg was still there. It was just like cut, you know, like sword or something. So that's in my mind, but could also be.
There could just be a big chunk out of the side missing. Of it, you know?
Yeah.
Odd. I don't know, but I like that idea that potentially Girl on Dragon has a little bit of will. And then there's also in the same episode, we're discussing the sudden abilities Fitz has with the skill and how we wonder how that happens. Is it the skill stream, learning from the coterie, etc.? And they thought that one of the reasons is that he stopped using elf bark for a long time.
Yeah, so his ability is kind of coming back stronger, and also you can do
more.
Yeah, you can do more, and it just kind of comes to you naturally, I guess, in that way.
Yeah, we do see in the final trilogy when Fitz is in Kelsingra, he heals all of the children.
Yeah,
and
it's
he's
intuition.
And I know he has been healed before, so obviously there's a little bit of prior knowledge, but it seems like a lot of what's happening is like out of his hands. It's just something he knows how to do. But that could also be partially because he's in that skill building where that may have been the original purpose. It's a little bit unclear, but I do like the idea that because he didn't use elf bark and his skill was growing stronger, he just is getting better at being able to use the skill.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah. So thank you, Gil.
There's also a message from Cookie Baker who sent us a song that they had like written and sent through. And it was really cool, and just wanted to shout out to you. Thanks for sending that our way. It's cool to read the lyrics and hear it.
Very cool. And then to finish up on just a fun little lighthearted thing, I asked a question for chapter 2, episode 250, chapter 2 of Fool's Errand, where I said, would you rather have Fitz, Chade, or Burek give you the birds and bees talk? And just in case that is a colloquialism to English, birds and bees is like the talk parents have with their kids about sex.
The sex education talk.
The safe sex education with your parents. So I asked who you would prefer, and we got a really funny reply from Tamara Wonder on Instagram saying, not sure even Fitz is capable of having that conversation. I imagine Burek would be very anatomically correct, or just slap on the head and send out to the barn for the lesson.
The National Geographic lesson. Nice.
And then told abstinence is the only acceptable and honorable option. And then Chade's would probably be the most entertaining talk. Probably some ancient texts, some chemical experiments to get his points across, and pointers and herb lore and all of that. So I thought that was a really funny response. I don't know that Fitz would like shut down. I agree that Burek would promote abstinence is key, and Chade would be like, all right, let's get into it.
I don't know about the Burek part where abstinence is key, because according to everyone, he was like the talk of the town, a player before he had his leg and took care of Fitz.
Okay, but is that how he would treat a child that he's giving the birds and bees talk to? No, he's not gonna be like, yeah, get at it. He's gonna be like, don't bring any more bastards into this life.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Be like your father.
Yes.
But not that way.
Actually, don't be like your father. All right. Well, thank you, everybody who wrote in. It's always fun to hear what you guys have to say, whether that's just a passing thought that you had, a disagreement, or something that you really liked, or an idea that was sparked from what we said. So thank you guys so much. Thank you all for the kind words, and we look forward to hanging out with you next week.